Imagine this. You're in the middle of a heated argument. Your heart is racing, your palms are sweaty, and every word feels like a dagger aimed at your opponent. You're laser-focused, crafting your next response, determined to prove you're right. But here's the thing. The person across from you, they're doing the exact same thing. Neither of you is really listening. You're both just waiting for your turn to strike. And then out of nowhere, he steps in. He doesn't take sides. He doesn't tell you what to say. Instead, he leans in and whispers something that stops you cold. You have already lost. Wait, what? How? You're fighting. You're defending yourself. You're standing your ground. How could that mean defeat? Because as he explains, the moment you engage in this kind of battle, you've already given away your power. True strength, he argues, isn't about fighting to be right. It's about something far more subtle, far more unexpected. So what is this hidden power? And why does silence often speak louder than words? Let's unravel this philosophy and uncover the silent trick that gives you real power. Most people believe that power comes from winning arguments, from proving others wrong, from dominating conversations. But what if that's all wrong? What if the loudest voice in the room isn't the most powerful? It's just the loudest? What if true power lies not in the words you speak, but in the silence you choose? This is the essence of his philosophy. The moment you let someone drag you into a battle of egos, you've already lost. Why? Because you're playing their game, by their rules. True power, he insists, comes from control, not over others, but over yourself. It's about knowing when to speak, when to listen, and when to let your silence do the talking. So what's the secret? Why does silence hold such power? And how can you use it to your advantage? Let's dive deeper into this counterintuitive idea and explore how the quietest moments can often be the most powerful. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't to fight back. It's to step back, stay silent, and let the other person unravel themselves. Ready to uncover the silent trick that can change the way you approach every argument, every conflict, and every conversation? Let's begin. Most people believe that power comes from winning arguments, proving others wrong, and dominating conversations. But Friedrich Nietzsche had a completely different view. He believed power wasn't in words, it was in control. Why do people argue? If you've ever found yourself in a heated argument, you know how quickly things escalate. But have you ever stopped to ask why people argue in the first place? Nietzsche would say that most arguments aren't about truth, but about deeper psychological needs. Ego protection. People argue because their identity is at stake. Accepting they're wrong feels like losing a part of themselves. The mind resists this at all costs. Power struggles. Many debates aren't about facts or logic. They're battles for dominance. Who speaks last? Who controls the tone? Who makes the other back down? Herd mentality, social validation. Some people argue not because they believe in their point, but because they want to be seen as smart, confident, or strong by their peers. Nietzsche saw these behaviors as signs of weakness. He believed that those who react emotionally to arguments are being controlled. The moment you let someone provoke you, you've already lost. Nietzsche's famous idea of the will to power is often misunderstood. It's not about brute force, it's about the ability to impose your will on reality. This doesn't always require words. Sometimes the strongest power is the ability not to react. And this is where the true essence of power lies. In the quiet, unshakable control over yourself, even when the world around you is in chaos. This is where the Ubermensch comes in, the ideal superior individual in Nietzsche's philosophy. The Ubermensch is not emotionally reactive like the average person. He doesn't argue just to win or prove a point. Instead, he chooses when to engage and when to remain silent. Because power isn't about talking, it's about controlling the entire interaction. For example, imagine a meeting where two people are arguing. One is loud and aggressive, trying to prove they're right. The other is calm and collected. They listen more than they speak. They don't get dragged into emotional back and forth. But when they finally say something, it's powerful, well-timed, and shifts the entire conversation. Who really holds the power here? Nietzsche would argue that the person who stays in control, who doesn't react emotionally, always wins in the long run. Why? Because strategic silence is more powerful than winning arguments. Silence, when used correctly, is not weakness. It's a psychological weapon. It forces the other person to reveal more about themselves. It makes them feel uncertain, causing them to second-guess their own words. It creates tension, and tension makes people uncomfortable, which gives you control. The Ubermensch doesn't just stay silent. He wields silence as a tool, mastering the art of influence without ever raising his voice or losing his composure. In this way, he transcends the petty battles of ego and emerges as the true holder of power. In arguments, the Ubermensch uses silence as a tool, a pause, a moment of restraint, a well-timed response that flips the conversation in his favor. This is why Nietzsche's version of power isn't about fighting. It's about mastering the battlefield before the fight even begins. Silence isn't just the absence of words. It's a tool, a weapon wielded by history's greatest minds to dominate battles of intellect, business, and war. Nietzsche's idea of power wasn't about loud arguments or winning debates. It was about influence, control, and strategic restraint. Let's explore three legendary figures who embodied this principle: Socrates, Steve Jobs, and Miyamoto Musashi. So first we will discuss Socrates' method, winning without fighting. Socrates never engaged in traditional arguments. He didn't yell, attack, or try to force his point. Instead, he used a technique so powerful that it still shapes intellectual discussions today. The Socratic method, a way of questioning that made people expose their own contradictions. Imagine this. A proud Athenian politician claims to be the wisest man in the city. Instead of outright challenging him, Socrates simply asks, "What is wisdom?" The man, eager to prove his intellect, begins defining it. But with every question Socrates asks, the politician's confidence wavers. His answers become tangled, his logic unravels, and eventually he realizes he doesn't truly understand what wisdom is. Socrates didn't argue. He used silence and questions to reveal the truth, proving that the real power lies not in shouting louder, but in thinking deeper. The definition falls apart. The politician, once so confident, now stumbles over his own words, realizing he has no true grasp of the very concept he boasts about. Socrates didn't need to tell people they were wrong. He made them realize it themselves. He understood a fundamental truth. People don't accept what you tell them. They only accept what they discover on their own. This is the essence of silent power. Instead of engaging in pointless shouting matches, ask questions that lead people to question themselves. On the other hand, we have Steve Jobs' strategy. In the art of controlled conflict, if Socrates dominated through questioning, Steve Jobs dominated through strategic persuasion. He didn't avoid arguments, he orchestrated them. His leadership at Apple wasn't about debating every small detail. It was about controlling the larger conversation. Jobs had a simple yet powerful principle. You don't waste energy on unnecessary fights, but when something truly matters, you go all in. One famous example was his battle with his own team over the iPhone's design. Engineers wanted physical buttons. Jobs wanted a full touchscreen. Instead of arguing endlessly, he led them to see his vision. He let them debate, let them express their concerns, until they realized, through his guidance, that a touchscreen device wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. He didn't tell people what to think. He guided them to think differently. Jobs' power lay in his ability to control the narrative, to steer the conversation without ever losing his composure. He understood that true influence isn't about winning every argument. It's about winning the right ones at the right time and in the right way. What to think? He made them believe it was their idea all along. Most people argue out of ego, to prove they are right, but Jobs argued with a purpose, to win people over, not to prove a point. And that's the key. If your words don't move people toward action, they are just noise. Then we have Miyamoto Musashi, the brave man. Miyamoto Musashi, the undefeated samurai, understood a simple truth. The best way to win a fight is to never draw your sword. Musashi won over 60 duels, but not just through physical skill. His greatest victories were psychological. He played mind games, unsettling his opponents before the battle even began. One famous example is his duel against the Sasaki Kojiro. Kojiro was a master swordsman, known for his deadly speed, but Musashi didn't challenge him head-on. Instead, he showed up hours late to the duel, making Kojiro furious. By the time Kojiro finally faced him, He was so blinded by anger that he made mistakes, allowing Musashi to defeat him with ease. Musashi knew that if your enemy is emotional, they are already weak. Nietzsche's philosophy aligns perfectly with this. The Ubermensch does not react. He controls the reaction of others. Musashi proved that silence, patience, and psychological dominance are often more powerful than brute force. Do you notice what Socrates, Steve Jobs, and Musashi all have in common? They never wasted energy on useless arguments. They did not react. They dictated the terms of engagement. They understood that true power is not in words, it's in influence. The next time you feel the urge to argue, ask yourself, am I reacting emotionally or am I controlling the situation? Because true power is silent. So why do we argue? Why do we feel the need to prove ourselves right, to fight back, to defend our ideas even when the argument is going nowhere? Most people believe that arguing is a way to assert dominance or protect their ego. But as Nietzsche, Socrates, Jobs, and Musashi show us, the real power lies not in the fight itself, but in the ability to rise above it. True strength is found in silence, in restraint, and in the quiet confidence of knowing when to speak and when to let your silence do the talking. Arguments are not about truth. They are about power. The more you argue, the more you reveal about yourself, your insecurities, your emotional triggers, and, most importantly, the fact that someone else is controlling your reaction. Nietzsche understood this deeply. His concept of the will to power wasn't just about physical dominance. It was about controlling yourself so well that others fall into your influence without even realizing it. And modern psychology proves just how accurate Nietzsche was. Have you ever noticed people getting trapped in arguments? It's because the arguments are not logical. They are psychological. When we argue, we believe we are standing up for our beliefs. In reality, we are often just reacting to deep-rooted psychological triggers. Let's break it down. First one is cognitive biases. Your brain wants to win, not learn. Our brains are wired with biases that make us terrible at arguing rationally. The biggest culprits? Second is confirmation bias. We only look for information that supports what we already believe. Third is backfire effect. When someone challenges our beliefs, we don't change our minds. We double down. Fourth is Dunning-Kruger effect. The less we know, the more confident we are in our opinions. Basically, these biases ensure that arguments rarely lead to truth or understanding. Instead, they become battles of ego, where the goal shifts from finding common ground to proving superiority. Nietzsche's insight that true power lies in self-control and strategic silence offers a way out of this cycle. By refusing to engage in emotional reactivity, you reclaim your power and force others to confront their own weaknesses. In the end, the person who stays silent often holds the most influence, not because they have nothing to say, but because they choose when and how to say it. According to the Dunning-Kruger effect, the less we know about something, the more confident we are in our opinions. These biases make most arguments pointless. No one actually listens. Instead, they just wait for their turn to speak. Nietzsche's Ubermensch avoids this trap. He listens, observes, and chooses whether the conversation is worth engaging in. The next question arises, which is, why we take some arguments personally. Have you ever wondered why some arguments make you furious while others don't bother you at all? That's because we don't argue over logic. We argue over identity. When someone disagrees with us on a deep level, it feels like a personal attack. That's why debates about politics, religion, or philosophy turn ugly so fast. People don't just feel like their ideas are being challenged. They feel like they themselves are being attacked. This is why the most powerful people in history never argue emotionally. If someone can make you emotional, they control you. The Ubermensch does not fall for this trap. He does not react. He observes, analyzes, and then decides whether or not to respond. Then the next thing plays the important role, because the real reason people argue. At the core of most arguments isn't truth, it's ego. People don't just want to be right, they want to be seen as right. Nietzsche understood that most humans seek validation from the herd. They argue not to find truth, but to gain approval. But the Ubermensch does not need validation. He creates his own truth. Think about the most influential figures in history. Did they waste time arguing with critics? Number. They focused on their vision, ignored distractions, and let their actions speak louder than words. Nietzsche was ahead of his time. His insights on power, control, and silence align perfectly with modern psychological research. Let's break it down. 1. Power dynamics and social interactions. Social psychologists have found that the most powerful people in any group are not the ones who talk the most, but the ones who control the flow of conversation. They don't interrupt. They don't over-explain. They choose their words carefully, making people hang on to every sentence. This is why powerful leaders rarely raise their voices. They don't need to. When they speak, people listen because they have already created an aura of authority through their silence. 2. The role of self-restraint and persuasion. Research in behavioral psychology shows that people who stay calm and composed in arguments are far more persuasive than those who get emotional. Why? Because humans are wired to see calmness as confidence. Nietzsche believed that true power comes from self-mastery. The Ubermensch is not a slave to his emotions. He does not react. He decides. And that makes him untouchable. The real reason Nietzsche saw silence as power was not because he wanted people to avoid conflict. It was because he knew that the one who controls his own reaction controls the entire conversation. Putting it into perspective. If someone insults you and you react, you have lost. If someone challenges you and you feel the urge to defend yourself, you have lost. If you get pulled into an argument just to prove you are right, you have lost. But if you observe, stay calm, and respond only when it serves your purpose, you have already won. Nietzsche's philosophy is not about staying silent forever. It's about choosing your battles. Ask yourself, am I speaking because I want to or because I feel forced to? Am I reacting emotionally or am I in control of my response? Is this argument worth my energy or am I just feeding my ego? Because true power, as Nietzsche saw it, is not in words. It's in the silence before the words, the pause that makes others lean in, the decision to speak only when it matters. And that is the silent trick that gives you power. And with no doubt, silence is powerful. But do you know what does that mean? Because silence doesn't mean passivity or surrender. It's a deliberate choice, a strategic tool wielded by those who understand that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the most influential. By mastering silence, you master the art of influence, control, and self-mastery. And in a world where everyone is shouting, the quietest voice often carries the most weight. So, should you always stay silent? Silence can be a weapon, but wielding it indiscriminately can be just as foolish as speaking without thought. If silence were the only path to power, then history's greatest minds, philosophers, revolutionaries, and visionaries, would have remained unheard. Yet they spoke, because real power is not in avoiding conflict. It's in knowing when to engage and when to hold back. Nietzsche's will to power, conflict as a path to mastery. Many misinterpret Nietzsche as an advocate of withdrawal or detachment from struggle. But his concept of the will to power was never about passivity. It was about domination, growth, and self-overcoming. Power is not in silence alone. It's in control. Avoiding conflict completely is not wisdom. It's fear disguised as restraint. Mastering conflict does not mean rejecting it. It means using it as a tool. Nietzsche's Ubermensch does not argue over petty things, but he also does not run from necessary battles. He knows that conflict can be a crucible for strength. Have you ever wondered, why do most people avoid arguments? Because they are uncomfortable. But Nietzsche understood that discomfort breeds strength. He saw struggle as necessary, not as something to be avoided. Weak thinkers avoid challenges. Strong thinkers welcome them because challenge forces refinement. Imagine a warrior who never enters battle. A blade that is never tested against steel will never be battle-ready. In the same way, a mind that is never challenged remains dull, weak, and fragile. Without intellectual conflict, your ideas remain untested. Without struggle, your convictions remain hollow. Think about the boldest thinkers. From Socrates to Steve Jobs, from Nietzsche himself to revolutionary leaders, they didn't shy away from conflict. They engaged in it. strategically, purposefully, and with control. They understood that conflict, when approached with the right mindset, is not a threat but an opportunity. It's a chance to refine your ideas, sharpen your convictions, and prove your strength. The Ubermensch doesn't seek out unnecessary battles, but he doesn't fear them either. He uses conflict as a tool for growth, knowing that true power lies not in avoiding the storm, but in learning to dance in the rain. So the next time you face an argument, ask yourself, is this a battle worth fighting? If it is, step into it with purpose, control, and the quiet confidence of someone who knows that conflict, when mastered, is the path to true power. The power of choosing your battles. Throughout history, the boldest thinkers didn't shy away from conflict. They embraced it, but with purpose. Galileo was condemned for challenging the church's view of the universe. Socrates was sentenced to death for questioning conventional beliefs. Nietzsche himself was dismissed as a madman in his time. Yet today, their ideas shape modern thought. Their power didn't come from silence. It came from choosing their battles wisely and engaging in necessary conflict. There's a critical difference between arguing to prove you're right and arguing to shape reality. Nietzsche understood this. The greatest leaders, philosophers, and visionaries don't avoid arguments. They use them strategically. Consider Socrates. He didn't attack others' beliefs directly. He questioned them until they collapsed on their own. Nietzsche's writings were designed to challenge, provoke, and shake people out of their mental complacency. Steve Jobs didn't avoid conflict. He used it to push people beyond their limits and drive innovation. Powerful people don't argue for validation. They argue for transformation. They don't fight to win debates. They fight to shape the world in their vision. The Ubermensch doesn't argue to satisfy his ego. He argues with purpose. Arguing without strategy is weakness. Arguing with precision is power. Nietzsche wasn't afraid of arguments. He embraced conflict, but on his own terms. If an argument makes you weaker, avoid it. If it makes you stronger, engage with it. If it's just a distraction, ignore it completely. Conflict, when mastered, isn't something to be avoided. It's something to be wielded. The silent strategy. Imagine this. You wake up one day and a voice tells you that you only have 100 words left to speak in your entire life. Every sentence, every word now carries weight. Would you waste them in a heated argument? Would you spend them trying to prove yourself to someone who isn't even listening? Or would you choose them carefully, like a warrior sharpening his final blade before battle? This is where real power lies. Nietzsche understood something most people ignore. Words are currency. The more you spend them carelessly, the less valuable they become. Now picture yourself in an argument. Your heart races. Your mind floods with comebacks, defenses, and points you're dying to prove. But stop. Breathe. Ask yourself, who truly holds the power here? The one frantically trying to prove himself, or the one who knows when to stay silent? Because silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. It's control. It's the art of making others question themselves without you ever needing to convince them. The next time you're about to argue, pause. Instead of reacting immediately, observe. Watch how the other person reveals their weaknesses. See how they show you their fears, their insecurities, just by the way they speak. And then, when the time is right, choose your words like a master, or don't speak at all, because true power is silent. Want more insights on philosophy, psychology, and power? Hit subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a deep dive into the ideas that shape the way we think and live. Stay sharp, stay powerful.